Well, I gotta do something with my life during this pandemic, so I don't have any excuses not to try this YouTube thing now. What better subject to cover in the pilot episode for my comedic gaming channel than my ranting about a somewhat obscure game that nobody in their right mind would ever defend? I'm talking about the first Sniper Ghost Warrior. If you're not familiar with this series and its tacky mobile game name that totally won't look out of place on the Google Play Store, it's basically seen as the inept and unloved younger brother of the much more well-known and successful Sniper Elite, which is very relatable. This 2010 release marks CI Games', then known as City Interactive, first attempt at abandoning their old ways of making shovelware that nobody liked, to their much brighter state of recent years, of making middle shelf games that nobody likes. Except for me, because if there's anything I've learned over the years, I have low standards. As simple and or buggy as they can be, anyone I've spoken to about games knows that I have a peculiar affinity for these unpolished, polished products. Wait, let me do that again. Unpolished, polished products, especially the later SGW games. However, even a rather forgiving and generous person like myself has a breaking point. Like the process of puberty, CI's initial steps into maturing into a AA studio and what would later become their malnourished cash calf is rife with poor decisions and mistakes, an identity crisis, and thinking to yourself, what the fuck am I doing with my life? You know you're off to a great start when the logos, intro video, and main menu background are all black and white and upside down. Look at this, I just booted up the game. I'm not really one to focus on video game stories that much, mostly because I don't pay enough attention or I'm too stupid to understand them, so it's nice that there's not very much to unpack here. You play as Sniper Sergeant Tyler Wells, aka Razor64. Accompanied by a spotter O'Neill, undercover CIA agent Rodriguez, and the Delta Force, they're tasked with taking down the oppressive regime of General Vasquez and his army in the fictional Latin American country of Isla Trueno. Indeed, as one might expect for these generic modern military games, and hell most of CI's output, it's your bog standard burly Americans killing people who aren't burly Americans because they aren't burly Americans, and human rights violations with an added side of drugs and also nukes. Graphically, SGW is a fairly mixed bag, but all in all, I actually like the way it looks in spite of some of its issues. While there's loads of other 2010 or even older games that look much better than it, considering the games CI used to make, it's quite a step up. Not that the bar wasn't already depressingly low. What?! Running on Chrome Engine 4, there's a pretty respectable attention to detail in much of the game's environments. The landscapes of Isla Trueno are full of lush and diverse vegetation that come together to create believable, dense jungles and other grassy areas. Assorted props and debris are scattered across the ground to make places feel more lived in, along with some animals like chickens, cows, and even crocodiles. The ruins seem to have had a fair amount of effort put into them, with Aztec-inspired architecture, intricate patterns and sculpting, and varied brick sizes. All tied together with some nice lighting and good draw distance, it's a game that still looks rather pretty today, at least to me. It also ran smoothly, although that should go without saying, I guess. Hell, this budget game even lets you see your legs and cast a shadow. However, like a kid going through puberty, there's a fair amount of blemishes upon closer inspection. One thing that you no doubt have noticed is that the game has more than a few blurry edges thanks to the bad anti-aliasing, bloom, and depth of field. While the last two things do at least create a certain atmosphere, these really make the game look soft-focused and washed out at a distance, hurting its clarity and readability. Annoyingly, these are all tied under the same setting, post-processing, with no way to turn them down individually. Setting it to simple does make the game a lot sharper and clear, but as a downside, it destroys the nice lighting. It's especially apparent in nighttime levels where the moonlight is just completely gone. Personally, I kept the post-processing at normal. Some of the textures can be below par, but distant mountains have it the worst, with the individual pixels being about a square acre each. The same can also be said about the seriously ugly shadows, which look like they came straight out of a voxel-based game. This is at max settings. Predictably, the animation quality is poor. Nearly all the reloading animations are super stiff and stilted, except maybe the pistol, but its slide doesn't even move. There's not even a crawling animation. Some other flubs also include some serious popping at times, the otherwise decent looking water, bending reality around your view model, and character models that can look wrong. Moving on to the other technical aspects of the game, this FOV is way too low for me. It's not nauseatingly bad, but as a person who normally cranks that up to 100 degrees or more, it just makes the game feel more clunky and stiff than it already is. There's not even a known way to mod it according to the PC Gaming Wiki. While I did get used to it, I don't think Stockholm Syndrome can excuse the exclusion. I guess it's kinda understandable though. It's not like most if not all of CI shovelware were PC exclusives and ran on engines that started their lives on PC. You may also run into a few instances where you can just get stuck on the geometry. Sometimes you'll have staircases with a top step that's much too high, blocking you if you crouch. Sometimes a normal staircase will just trap your feet, the odd protruding rock might make you think you hit an invisible wall, and a door will just not work. There's a few things I don't like about the UI as well. Your minimap is barely readable due to excessive topographical detail that makes enemy markers difficult to see at a glance most of the time, somehow making green and red not contrast even if you're not colorblind. In similar fashion, the all-important Crisis-style stealth meter is so subtle and hard to see, I didn't even realize it was there until I was about 3/4 through the game the first time I played it. Hell, I still forget it exists sometimes. You could just call me an idiot for that last one for not reading the UI properly, but some people have trouble aiming in SGW contracts. You're matching numbers in a line that explicitly shows the bullet drop! What the fuck is wrong with you? That's a convenient segue. As is typical for these realistic sniping games, your stamina and stance determines how much your scope will sway, you need to consider the bullet's travel time, and you have to account for wind and bullet drop in order to figure out where the bullet will go. For the most part, the ballistics actually work as intended and are somewhat simple to follow. According to my tests, provided you're using the SR25, the MSG90, or the AS50, since they all have similar reticles, each of the ticks below the crosshair represent how much the bullet will drop in 50-meter increments at the max zoom level of 15. So if you're aiming at an enemy that's about 220 meters away and you're fully zoomed in, you have to aim just under the 4th line. In the case of the MSG and the AS50, it's technically the 3rd line since their scopes skip the first 50-meter line that the SR25 has. This doesn't apply to the other rifles since they have different reticles that don't quite have the bullet drop in mind and thus are less intuitive. The wind obviously dictates which direction the bullet will veer off to, with it moving more and more the longer the distance. That being said, from my experience, the ranges you snipe at are usually too short for the wind to really be an issue, or on the flip side, it's not strong enough at longer ranges to really affect trajectory, even as it, oddly, tends to frequently swing between left and right to varying degrees. When you factor in the generous one-shot kill areas, you can usually aim at around center mass and be fine. Bullet drop is pretty much the dominant factor at play. That being said, that entire spiel only matters if you play on hard. If you play on even medium, you'll get a little red dot that tells you exactly where the bullet will land. Hold on, let me grab my soapbox. Why the fuck is this a feature in sniping games? What's the goddamn point of programming all of these ballistics if you're just gonna give players the exact answer outright? I'll admit that it's a useful tool to learn how they work at first. I do it all the time. But the training wheels have to come off. Otherwise, it's no different from sniping in most other games where the bullets always go to the center of the screen. It's like playing a puzzle game that has the answer displayed at all times. The way I see it, ballistics essentially add a minor balancing factor to snipers so that it doesn't straight up become brain-dead, risk-free point-and-click shooting, at least at long ranges. If you've ever cleared outposts in Far Cry with a silent sniper rifle, and I know you have, you know exactly what I mean. This all forces you to be more methodical with your shots, which turns a potentially game-breaking weapon into something that at least has a slight learning curve to deal with the bullet curve. Even if the mechanics end up being so second nature that you don't even have to think, there's still that margin of error that can make you hold your breath in anticipation alongside your character as you pull the trigger. Above all else, it's personally just more fun that way. It's far more satisfying to land a long-distance shot I had to compensate for than for one that went exactly where I pointed the crosshairs. It gives me the confidence boost that I so desperately need. So just never use the aim assist in any sniping game. Otherwise you're dead to me. Anyway, even though I complained about how the game has poor visibility at a distance, which would obviously hurt the sniping, thankfully there's a solution, however temporary it may be. When you hold your breath to stabilize your scope, enemies become highlighted as the background desaturates. Combined with the slow-mo and its accompanying sounds, I just think it looks and feels really cool. Altogether though, how does sniping actually feel? Considering the last time I tried something like this, it's not that bad. Dare I say pretty damn good when everything clicks, even if it's a little too easy in most scenarios. If you're not familiar with sniping games, you're typically given a bolt-action rifle, at least by default, in order to force you to aim carefully, since follow-up shots can be extremely hard to perform with them. If you are given a semi-automatic rifle, usually it'll come at a cost, like lower damage, insanely punishing muzzle velocity, or the rate of fire won't be that much higher. SGW doesn't abide by this principle, oddly enough. In the main campaign, every rifle you come across is semi-automatic, can kill in a single shot to center mass, have fairly high rates of fire, and low recoil. When you factor in that time slows down a fair bit when you hold your breath, this can result in you being able to eliminate pairs or a small group of soldiers at superhuman speeds with relative ease in a single inhale. If you're really feeling spicy, you can get away with something like this. It's enough to make Sam Fisher's Mark and Executor Max Payne look as efficient as Polygon playing Doom. It's not super skillful or precise, but it's quite the power trip that no other sniping game can match. Yeah, I know that it validates my soapboxing a bit, but it still applies to other SGW games and Sniper Elite. I'd argue that even the sound design's decent for most of the snipers. While the suppressed rifles have that typical stock squeaky weak sauce, the rest of them sound beefy as hell. As I've already shown you at least a few times by now, we got bullet cams. While Sniper Elite is obviously the undisputed king of these bite-sized snuff films, these aren't that bad for the time, even if the impacts look really goofy. It's bad pizza. I'd say there's two things holding back how it all feels. One is the lack of bullet tracers or some kind of visible round when firing. Without them, the travel time feels more like an awkward pause more than anything. And two, your pulse will skyrocket just by crawling around a bit, let alone sprinting. So if you want to actually be able to aim well, you're gonna need a quick Cheeto and Mountain Dew break.
And why don't you all just take a Cheetos and Mountain Dew break and we'll reconvene in an hour?
Considering the stealth mechanics and being a ghost warrior... Okay, I don't know if I have ever come across a stealth system and AI this uncomfortably inconsistent. For the love of God, I've played this game twice and I still don't quite understand what I can and can't do. I can be slowly crawling up to an enemy with their back turned while in the grass, in a ghillie suit, only to instantly get spotted, but then I could stand out in the open in front of 3 soldiers and the stealth meter doesn't even fucking budge. Not even a particularly leafy plant does anything to hide me sometimes. There's one mission that requires you to stay undetected for most of it. This is true for the first area where one guy spotted me, failing the mission as expected. But in the second area, even though the game still said to stay undetected, I alerted every fucker in the area and was still fine. I could shoot my unsilenced rifle with reckless abandon next to an enemy, but if I just jump, I alert him. In one area, something made the enemies go completely apeshit, even though I didn't do anything and my detection meter was empty. Even weirder, enemies that were standing just nearby didn't even hear a thing. I could go on. Really, look at any other review of this game and you'll see that sentiment thrown around. Even when the game actually feels as functional as it can be, it's decent if still a bit annoying due to the game not doing a great job at communicating that you're being spotted beyond the super subtle detection bar. Enemies don't even seem to have something as standard as suspicious lines.
Claro, es una marca nueva. Más filtro, pero con un sabor fuerte e intenso. Dime qué te parece.
Before you rag on me for being bad and asking for an easy mode, a lot of stealth games, including some much beloved classics, at least have nice, readable UIs and frequent enemy barks or other sound cues to warn you that you're about to fuck up.
What is that?
So this game doing the absolute minimum along with the inconsistent AI can just make the stealth feel unreliable in practice. You also have a couple of other weapons to help you with your stealth, as much as they can anyway. Obviously you got your sidearm, a suppressed Mark 23, which is your standard spammy backup panic pistol. Alongside that, you unexpectedly have a set of throwing knives. While they lack a real purpose due to being far slower and harder to use than your handgun, their raw power is a force to be reckoned with. It can kill enemies in a single hit, 99% of the time anyway, making them crumble to the ground like a source ragdoll, including comical thudding sounds. Unfortunately, the main campaign's offering of sniping and stealth-based levels is extremely underwhelming. There's exactly one genuinely good map that actually capitalizes on both of those elements, while the rest are just either sort of okay or very linear, 8th-ass COD-like levels that just waste the game's potential. On your own, the game's 7th mission is easily, much like an ideal sniping position, the high point of the main story. Honestly, if the whole game just used this very formula for every level and never deviated from it, it would have ended up being a bit of a hidden gem, even if you didn't change the janky feel of it. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic because it's such a palate cleanser, but I honestly had a decent amount of fun, and I have no shame in saying that. After being unable to evacuate from a cocaine plantation prepped for an airstrike for reasons that I'd be able to explain if the cutscene didn't bug out, Wells is forced to make his way to another evac point. Before he can, however, he has to destroy 3 AA guns in the area using C4, which needs to be stolen from deep within enemy territory. Throughout the entire level, you're free to move around at your own pace, with the waypoints mostly only designating the key objectives. While nowhere near the degree of other stealthy sandbox games, the map is just open enough to give a sense of freedom, allowing you to move around enemies on roads and get different angles on them if you're feeling adventurous enough. The game recommends that you snipe and clear out an area from a designated vantage point, but it's entirely optional. It's obviously not flawless, however. Even though the game lets you destroy the guns in any order you want, you wouldn't really want to do that because of how they're placed relative to you when you grab the C4. You'd just be wasting your time. There's also some invisible walls blocking some pathways that look like places where you should be able to go. Nevertheless, this is a surprisingly solid offering that's mostly in line with what I look for in this niche genre. Moving down a peg in quality, we have the missions or sections that are merely just okay to me, consisting of the smaller stealth maps and sniper support sections. The more confined stealth levels are adequate enough without being worth talking about at length individually. They do let you move at your own pace and usually aren't total corridors, but they don't push any boundaries like on your own. There is actually one instance in these levels where CI have tried to change things up a bit, but it's not great. In the second mission, there's one section where if you manage to hop on a truck without setting off an alarm, it takes you to the next level transition hassle-free as a sort of stealth bonus. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's a neat touch coming from a budget developer. But in reality, the trip actually just saves you a fucking 100-meter jog. It even still takes the same amount of in-game time. I suppose it saves you from a bunch of enemies as well, but the change is overall so minor that I legit burst out laughing when I first tested this. The latter are exactly what they sound like. You camp at a vantage point and help the Delta Force fend off waves of enemies as they try to complete an objective. It's pretty simple stuff, but like I said, the sniping is satisfying enough to make them not a total write-off. It's like popping bubble wrap. The worst of the stealth-focused levels are just railroads, guided by waypoint breadcrumbs or an NPC over the radio.
Let him pass, then go through the building at 9 o'clock.
These are just aggressively dull, patronizing snooze fests that hold your hand throughout the whole section, making them almost impossible to fail as long as you do exactly what they say and don't create too much noise as you move from place to place. They turn the game into a mix of Simon Says and red light, green light.
Llámame cuando llegues a... Wait till they split line.
¿Qué?
Easier to take him out.
Hablaremos de esto luego.
Could be because CI wasn't willing to let go of their childhood games just yet. They're essentially like the stealth levels of the Call of Duty games, but without any of the atmosphere or spectacle that makes up for the lack of substance. So, my intro sounded pretty harsh, yeah? An empty, hyperbolic hook to keep you invested in this damn video. I mean, so far, SGW just seems like a rather mediocre but innocuous stealth game. I've intentionally avoided what follows until now. I must remind you, this is a generic modern military game that came out in 2010. And oh man, they just couldn't help themselves. Shit. God. Once again, like puberty, things get hairy and fucking stinky. At several points over the course of the campaign, CI have shoehorned in these absolutely atrocious Spunkgargleweewee sections where you play as a Delta Force operative. Now, I'm not really a fan of modern COD campaigns and how they've unleashed a slew of mediocre games with the same dull-ass FPS gameplay in the late 2000s and early 2010s. But if there's anything I can now appreciate about them, at least they fucking work! I don't think I can possibly overstate how god-awful these parts are. There is not one single thing I can give them credit for, and they have no place in something marketed on being a sniping game. Maybe the inclusion of medkits is somewhat interesting? I don't know. Let's just start with the obvious thing. Without hyperbole, this is the worst fucking gunplay that I have ever had the displeasure of experiencing in any FPS. Forget Aliens, Colonial Marines, Half-Life 2, or any other game you want to argue has bad gunplay. What? Nothing will feel as bad as this. The recoil on every assault rifle is the biggest culprit here. It's just amazingly uncontrollable. I have nothing more to add, just look at this! Side note, you can find hidden USAS-12s laying around in some levels, which oddly have zero recoil. Unfortunately, the range and accuracy is pretty bad, which limits its use because, surprise, it's a video game shotgun. As if that wasn't bad enough, for some godforsaken reason, ARs have this weird and obnoxious mouse acceleration whenever you aim that's not even acknowledged by the PC Gaming Wiki, and there's no way to fix it. It makes everything from recoil control to target acquisition basically impossible. The latter is made even worse due to the blinding muzzle flash, the murky graphics that makes enemies hard to see, and the fact that said enemies will make your screen shaky and blurring when they hit you. Speaking of which, they naturally don't seem to have any issue controlling their guns. Sprinting from a crouched position basically doesn't work properly because for some reason, hitting shift will simply cause your character to just stand up and not run until a couple of seconds later. This makes movement feel unresponsive and enemy grenades harder to avoid if they land at your feet. Perhaps the most baffling blunder of all is this little animation that causes you to point your weapon in the air when you stand too close to an object. It seems like a pretty weird thing to complain about because it's kind of a standard detail in a lot of FPSs. It's more realistic and lets you know what direction you'll lean in. Ha, that's a cute suggestion. Nope. Here it serves to basically do the exact opposite. Whenever your gun is raised, you cannot aim or shoot. Period. Even if you approach something while aiming, the game deems this useless animation more important and snaps you out of it. If you try to hold the right mouse button while your gun is raised, the action won't be buffered by the game, so you'll still have your gun at the hip when you move away. It's just kind of annoying and janky at best, and can actively hinder your ability to fire from cover at worst. If this game didn't have quick saves, I don't think I would have ever bothered to finish it. Think we're done? Not even close. In the 6th mission, after an awful combat section, you switch back to playing as well as sniping from a lighthouse to impede reinforcements from reaching Delta Force. You'd think firing a 50 cal from a high ground will be an absolute breeze as you pick off hapless soldiers who don't even properly aim the rifles half the time, but you underestimate their power. Unlike the other kind of okay sniping sections, I think this one's cursed. The main difference between this section and the others is that in this case, the enemies are solely focused on you. There are no friendlies to distract them, and this really shows how bullshit the AI can be, more so than the Delta Force parts. Even though you have to compensate for the ballistics and travel time to zero in on a target, the dozens of enemies you're up against have zero problem spraying you down, making the odds actually heavily stacked against you. And because you're on top of a lighthouse, you can't reposition, and you have no cover when peeking over the walls to fire at the swarm of angry bees below. I get that if you couldn't take damage at all, it'd be too easy, but this balancing is just so far off the mark. Like my bullets in these hurricane speed winds. There's still one more kind of section that just drove me up the wall, perhaps even more than the combat in the lighthouse, and that's the escape sequences in missions 9 and 13. Have trouble running in a straight line? Get good! If that's what you're thinking, 1, I don't blame you for wanting to take a cheap jab at me, and 2, please just think about how broken, unbalanced, and poorly thought out your game has to be for something this simple to require dumb luck. In Mission 9, things get real shitty the second you hit the water. At this point, you're quite literally a sitting duck. You're in perfect view of every enemy, you don't have any cover, you can't heal while swimming. As you can see in this clip, I barely made it to the only damn safe spot in the river, one that was probably just part of the environment and not something placed by the developers with a sense of fairness. As for Mission 13... holy shit. Okay, I need to rant about this whole stupid level for a bit. In this level, you play as the spotter O'Neill, which in concept sounds kinda interesting. In practice, it's a dead easy on-rail segment where you have to spot targets for well so he can shoot them. It's literally just sniping, but slower, easier, and fucking boring. It's one thing to have a dumb gimmick, and it's another thing to have one that's just a worse version of an already frequent gameplay element. After you spot a key figure so Wells can do the fun part, it's time to make your escape, and yeah. Fuck this part. It just broke me. I'm not sure if this is actually the case, but O'Neill seems to die so much faster compared to Wells or the Delta Force guys, so it's borderline impossible to get the hell out of Dodge. You basically have no way of thinning out the horde since you only have a pistol, and grabbing a crappy rifle off the two guards along your path is obviously out of the question. Even if you take the quicker and safer path that the game does nothing to draw your eye towards in the heat of the moment, you're still not safe from enemy fire, which is problematic as you approach, you guessed it, another fucking river that leaves you completely vulnerable. As I slowly went insane as I kept replaying this section over and over, I finally evaded my pursuers through sheer luck and repeatedly injecting myself with morphine, proving that substance abuse is a viable way of overcoming life's problems. Only to immediately get gunned down by this group of assholes who somehow spotted me instantly. Because God forbid I continue to have forward momentum after literally running for my life. Mercifully, the game did autosave just before, so that's nice. Anyway, I'm just gonna go and crawl towards that waypoint. Don't want to get into another fight I didn't even bother to record my subsequent attempts because if I did, I'd be wading through dozens of the same fucking clips. I have tried so many times to get to that fucking waypoint to make sure I wasn't doing something wrong. But nope, even though I'm literally being as stealthy as I can possibly be and going exactly where the game tells me to, I'm still being punished for it. These guards are just broken in the worst way possible. I have no idea how I got past this area the first time I played this, and I'm not about to find out. Yes, I cheated, and I'm okay with that. Anyway, thank God that's over. I can finally...
Jesus Christ, O'Neill, what took you so long?
Oh yeah, there's also secrets. They give you more backstory for the plot that you totally don't care about. Anyway, you want to know how this whole campaign ends? You go through a small, cramped map that's admittedly kind of a neat callback to the first level to get to a sniping position, and then this happens. Yeah, that's it. It's hilariously anticlimactic, but after experiencing the game's attempts to be bombastic, it's probably better that way. You know you're off to a great end when the credits are all black and white and upside down. Look at this, I just finished the game! We're not quite done yet. The game also comes packaged with the Second Strike DLC. It gives you a total of 4 new missions, 3 of them grouped into the Unfinished Business campaign, and the last one being a special challenge map, which all involve tying up some loose ends after killing Vasquez. In Unfinished Business, Vasquez's son, Jesus Santana,
It's pronounced Jesus, and I don't know you.
is supposed to be his replacement, so Wells and O'Neill are sent to put him down. It's much better than the base game, although that's mostly because they removed the abysmal stuff while still keeping much of the mediocrity. You get a new rifle here, a suppressed L96 whose bolt-action nature demands precision and prevents you from high-nooning groups of soldiers, a welcome balancing factor. The scope kinda sucks though, having this weird gap in the reticle that makes determining the bullet drop a bit tricky. The first level is largely the same old red light, green light design with the tedious but inoffensive sniping section and an escape sequence that lasts too long, but at least is not as bullshit compared to the other ones. The same can mostly be said about the second mission too, although it has the odd small moment where you're not restricted and can do whatever. There's even a hidden spot in one area for your grappling hook, which was originally only used to traverse along the preset path rather than being something cool. It allows you to bypass an enemy checkpoint. It's somewhat interesting, I guess. The third and final level is aptly named Better Late Than Never because it's probably the best mission of the entire game, including on your own. Like that mission, the game doesn't hold your hand, there's just enough room to maneuver around your enemies, fairly long sight lines, you can get caught without penalty for most of it, and it's just so satisfying to play. It does falter a bit near the end, as getting caught will fail the mission, and killing Jesus is an exercise in trial and error, but otherwise, this is what the whole game should have been. The challenge map is, as the name implies, a special level that removes most of your HUD elements, only saves manually, you can only reload if you die, and if you leave partway through, you gotta start over. Your main objective this time is to kill one of Vasquez's last supporters, an arms dealer named Jose Costanzo. This time you get an intervention, which is like the L96 but it sounds way more powerful, has a slightly better reticle, and allows you to reenact your MW2 days. Honestly, the map isn't great. It has some moments where it's kind of okay, but there's also parts where the game is kind of bullshit. Not hard, bullshit. On a few occasions, the game loves to place enemies in high up areas that you'll likely not notice until you're dead, and then there's this fucking camp. I don't know who designed this place, but good lord. It starts simple enough with you taking out 3 guards and towers with your silent, unsuppressed rifle, but when you enter the camp, you're presented with some truly crappy enemy placement, and that's these 2 chuckle fucks right here. Even though the game says not to raise an alarm that doesn't even fail you if you do, as far as I know, there's no way to deal with them without going loud. If you try to go through either of these 2 shacks, they'll spot you instantly, one of whom through a plant. If you try to go to the right, there's 2 more guys that will spot you, and if you kill them, the aforementioned chucklefucks will notice. Even this hidden route to the left that I'm betting is merely unintentional, you won't be able to sneak past them. You also can't kill them without sounding the alarm. Because you have to move through an exposed area to get to the next waypoint, you're gonna get spotted and die in seconds. You could try to kill every enemy, but it's a tedious venture because you have to do it in one go, and the slightest mistake will get you gunned down instantly, so it's more trouble than it's worth. There's been so many times where I thought that I had cleared the camp only to miss one guy. I wouldn't be complaining as much if I could find another way around, but I've tried this section dozens of times, and as far as I know, this general area is the only way. The rest of the map has you run through a silo that lacks sound effects, and some ruins in a more or less linear, easy, and dull fashion as you make your way to the final sniping position. You shoot George Costanza and the level ends again, anticlimactically. Not even at the end this time. Look, a lot of games have their dull, annoying, or even straight up bad moments, but they're few and far in between, and the rest of these games are good enough to make the weaker parts worth dealing with to the point where they're barely a footnote by the end. Sniper Ghost Warrior isn't one of those games. The low points are genuinely so god-awful and repeated so often, I actually forgot about levels like On Your Own and Better Late Than Never until I replayed it, because the strongest memories I had of the stealth sniping game were the asinine assault levels. It's just not worth trudging through them, as well as the sleep-inducing Simon Says stealth to get to the good parts. It's like reading Emergence. Even if you isolate those moments, other sniping games available feel less janky, have better level design, are more consistent experiences in general, and most importantly, more fun. Unless you're an idiot who feels or felt compelled to play every one of CI's non-shovelware stuff, a demographic I assume is precisely just me and G-Man Lives, don't even bother with this hormonal, mood-swinging teenager of a game. Holy shit, that's gotta be the longest baby's first video ever. Whether you're a friend, acquaintance, or even a stranger who somehow made it through my incessant droning and bad jokes, I can't thank you enough. This is something I've wanted to do for years. Even if I don't make it big or I don't make too many more of these, I definitely had a lot of fun working on this project, even if it required me to play a game I strongly dislike. If you're interested in other stuff I've done, I have a DeviantArt account where I post drawings of varying quality, a Casting Call Club account where I post auditions of varying quality, and I'm in a game called Sniping 2 where I voice the friendly NPCs that directly inspired this persona. It's really good, by the way, please check it out, especially if you like fear. Anyway, if such a time comes, hopefully I'll see you in the next video. That'll age like milk, won't it?